Hello, beautiful best friends. It's so good to finally have you back in our tiny, cozy little corner of the internet. I hope this video finds you super well and that you are having the very best week of all time. It literally feels like it has been months instead of weeks, and I mean, call me clingy, but I missed you all so goddamn much. It's not even funny. By the way, if you're here strictly for the case or you're on your lunch break and you don't have time to listen to me ramble, I feel you. You can skip through to this time here and I will meet you there. But guys, I am so sorry for going MIA. If you follow me on Instagram, you might already be aware that I suffered a pretty severe-ish allergic reaction to an at-home hair dye job that nearly ended me up in hospital. You know, no big deal. I won't put you guys through the worst photos of my trauma, but you should just know that there were a good few days that I looked like I was trying out for the role of Quasimodo in the live-action remake of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Like, it was... so bad. But speaking of my face, if you are new here and you haven't seen it before, then hi, my name is Liz. It's so lovely to meet you. If you like hearing about things like true crime and unsolved mysteries, and apparently now at-home hair dye jobs gone terribly wrong, just kidding, Brad Mondo, please don't come for me, then you should definitely hit subscribe so that you and me can be best friends forever. You know, if you feel like that's something you want in your life. But just so you know, we're best friends now. As usual, of course, we are joined by Lily Girl here to give us top-notch emotional support and a generous dose of distractions throughout this video. Yay. Editing Liz, let's switch to Lily Cam. Hey, Lily. Are you keeping us company today? Hey? You keeping us company? So between a quarantine lockdown and my 4-year-old running around like an absolute maniac because it's school holidays and it's been raining here for what feels like 3 years straight, plus the dramatic lead up to this dramatic hair color, life has been totally normal and not crazy hectic at all. During my time away, I have been working on another multi-parter deep dive on a case suggested by one of you guys that I am really excited about, but I missed you all too much. So I decided to take a quick break and cover this case that we're talking about today. This case has been referred to as the Orange Socks murders and also the Rocky Mountains cold case. But despite it going cold for very nearly 4 decades, there was a huge breakthrough this year and an arrest made based on DNA evidence. So without further ado, let's get into it. Today, we are traveling back in time to 1982 because if you haven't already realized, I prefer my true crime a little bit more on the vintage side. And if you do as well, let me know. And that is something we can definitely pursue together. But we're going back to 1982 and we're traveling to a little beautiful town called Breckenridge in Colorado, USA, which is roughly a 2-hour drive west of the state's capital, Denver. Breckenridge is a ski town at the base of the 10-mile range that has drawn ski enthusiasts from all over the world since 1961 when its first ski trails were cut. It's beautiful, picturesque all year round. You know, in the spring and summer, there's hiking trails and wildflowers and wildlife. And in the winter, its most popular season, there's snow and a lot of it. Yay. Snow. Today, Breckenridge has a population of about 5,000 people, but back in 1982, it had a very small population of less than 1,000 permanent residents, plus, you know, all the tourists there for the snow. And it was a very chilly, snowy night on Wednesday, the 6th of January, 1982, when at about 7:50 p.m., Bobbie Jo Oberholtzer was leaving the village pub in town. 29-year-old Barbara, better known as Bobbie Jo to her friends and family, worked in an office in the same building as the pub, and she was there having drinks, celebrating with her co-workers because she had gotten a promotion from secretary to office manager. And to give you an idea of what Bobbie Jo was like, like? Firstly, she was a planner through and through. She was said to quite often be carrying around a notebook just full of notes and a budget plan for the horse corral she and her husband, Jeff Oberholzer, were planning to build on their property in Alma, which was about a half-hour drive from Breckenridge. Bobbie Jo also liked animals, like a lot. She had personally overseen the training of a wild Mustang, something that I would imagine would take a whole lot of patience and skill. She also raised birds from when they were just hatchlings to when they eventually learned to fly, and she loved her dog. This glorious, iconic picture was an anniversary gift from Bobbie Jo to Jeff. The store where the photo was taken, though, didn't actually allow dogs, but Bobbie Jo managed to get around this totally discriminatory rule by saying to the photographer that she was blind and that the dog, named Hey You, was her seeing eye dog. Back to this night, the 6th of January, Bobbie Jo, when she was leaving the pub, was offered a lift by her friends, but she turned them down knowing that they were all planning on being out late and she probably didn't want to be the reason that they had to call it a night early. She had also turned down a lift from her husband Jeff when she had called him about an hour and a half earlier, letting him know that she was going out for drinks but she would be back early. So Jeff was at home cooking dinner for them and their 11-year-old daughter so that it would be ready when Bobbie Jo got in. Bobbie Jo had turned down these lifts from her friends and from Jeff because she was going to be hitchhiking home, keeping in mind that in the 80s, hitchhiking was a lot more commonplace than it is these days, especially in an area like Breckenridge, where a lot of the residents were struggling for cash and couldn't afford their own cars, where everyone knew everyone in town and it was common practice while you were driving to keep an eye out for anyone that might need a lift into town and look out for them on your way out of town so that you could get them home. Hitchhiking was nothing at all like it is today, just so we're clear. Please don't try this at home, guys. Bobbie Jo, on the other hand, had hitchhiked to work that very morning at about 7:15 a.m. And when she left the pub, she was next seen at the Minute Mart just before 8 p.m, looking to hitch a ride southbound out of town towards home in Alma. Later that night, when Bobbie Jo didn't make it home when she said she was going to, Jeff assumed that she had changed her mind and stayed out later with her friends. I mean, it was her promotion that they were celebrating anyway, so he waited for another phone call, probably expecting Bobbie Jo to give him a call, ask for a lift when they were finished up, but this phone call never came. Around midnight, he started getting, a little bit worried, but when 2 a.m. rolled around, when all of the bars in town were closed and Bobbie Jo still hadn't shown up or called him, Jeff was in full-blown panic mode. He went out looking for her and he tried to file a missing persons report, but police told him it was way too early, that he would have to wait until morning. So instead, he gathered up a group of family and friends and they got organized to go searching for Bobbie Jo at first light. Jeff then got that missing persons report in first thing before the sun had even risen. And then this group went out searching for Bobbie Jo, looking for any sign of her first thing in the morning. And things quickly started unraveling from there. Jeff was told by a ranger who lived about 45 minutes out of Breckenridge towards Denver that he had found Bobbie Jo's driver's license along with several other contents from her wallet scattered in his property just next to the highway, as if someone had thrown them out the window while they were driving past. When Jeff and his friends were driving to pick these items up, Jeff saw something that immediately made him stop and pull over the car. It was just a speck, a tiny little speck of blue in the white snow, but as he got closer, Jeff knew it was what he had feared it had been when he spotted it. It was Bobbie Jo's backpack. If it wasn't already evident enough that Bobbie Jo was in trouble, near the bag they found one of her grey gloves which had been smeared with blood, and close to that a blood-stained tissue. So Jeff took up the search again, desperate to find Bobbie Jo, and he did. A couple of hours later at about 3 p.m. on the 7th of January. Bobbie Jo's body was found near the summit of Hoosier Pass, which is about a 20-minute drive south of Breckenridge and 20 miles or 32 k's from where her backpack was found. Some sources say that she was actually found by Jeff and his group, and other sources say that she was found by a couple of people that were skiing in the area. She was laying face up up in a snowdrift about 300 feet or 90 meters away from a parking lot at the top of the summit. On one of her wrists, there was 2 zip ties, suggesting that someone had tried to bind her at some point, and she had died of 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. In the parking lot, they found her house keys, which had a metal hook keychain attached to them, which was a self-defense weapon that Jeff had made for her. And near the keys, they also found an orange sock, the short kind that comes just to your ankle, called a bootie. But when Jeff was shown this sock, he didn't recognize it as belonging to Bobbie Jo. Looking at the evidence at the crime scene, the detectives surmised that the person that Bobbie Jo had hitched a ride from, rather than driving her home, had driven from Breckenridge to the parking lot at the top of the pass, where while they had been trying to restrain her with zip ties, Bobbie Jo had fought back and escaped from the car. She then made a run for it, running downhill along the road, when just before she reached the tree line, she was confronted again by her assailant or assailants and shot twice at close range. After she was shot, she fell and slid a short distance down the slope before coming to a stop where her body was found, where she had been left to die. That night, it had gotten to about -25 Fahrenheit or -30 Celsius. So in her final moments, Bobbie Jo had been terrified and alone, laying in the snow, in the dark, and in the bitter cold, slowly freezing and bleeding to death. Haunted by this image, detectives immediately began their investigation to find Bobbie Jo's killer, but this was going to be no easy task. As I said, Breckenridge is a ski resort town, so while there was only that small population of permanent residents, there were tons of tourists there for the ski breaks, staying in the hotels and cabins in the area. Whoever killed Bobbie Jo could have simply been in town for the winter break and then gone home to God knows where immediately after killing her. And in a strange twist, Bobbie Jo wasn't the only woman that had gone missing that night. Annette Kay Schnee was born on the 16th of January 1960, making her 21 years old, just 10 days short of her 22nd birthday. She had grown up in Iowa and moved to Omaha after high school to go to a modeling school for a year, and then moved on to Colorado. Annette had hopes of becoming a flight attendant in the near future, and in the meantime, she was working 2 jobs, cleaning rooms at the Holiday Inn in Frisco during the day, and then working at a bar called Flipside in Breckenridge by night. On the 6th of January, Annette had finished her shift at the Holiday Inn and was seen at a pharmacy called the Drugstore in Breckenridge at about 5:45 p.m, where she filled a prescription and was seen deep in conversation with a woman out the front. A witness described this woman as Caucasian with dark hair and a slender build, and said that she looked like she may have been camping out for a few days. And this witness reported hearing Annette remind this woman to buy cigarettes, which I find a little bit of an odd thing to be reminding someone. I mean, I've personally never been a smoker, but I know smokers, and they tend to not really need reminding to buy cigarettes. Like, they've got it. You know, this was the last sighting of Annette before she hitchhiked the 10-minute trip home south to Blue River, presumably where she was going to get ready for her shift that night at the bar, where she was scheduled to start at 8 p.m. But Annette, despite being known as very reliable and punctual at both of her places of employment, never showed up for her shift that night. And her uniform was still found at home, so it looks like she had never actually made it there from Breckenridge. Police immediately suspected that these 2 cases were connected. Bobbie Jo and Annette didn't know each other, they didn't have any known connections, but these 2 women were hitchhiking home from the exact same town on the exact same night and had gone missing within hours of each other. It was too big of a coincidence for investigators to ignore, and although they hadn't found Annette yet, they knew the fate that Bobbie Jo had met, so they had very grave concerns for her safety. Annette's mother, Elaine Franklin, was also worried. She had been trying to get through on the phone to Annette for a few days with no luck, and she was devastated when she got that phone call from authorities in Colorado letting her know that her daughter was missing. Elaine immediately traveled to Colorado, desperate to aid investigators in the search for Annette, and when she got there, they asked if she thought that Annette would ever just up and leave, you know, voluntarily without telling anyone. But looking at Annette's room, Elaine found it intact with nothing missing, and she knew that her daughter was scrupulous and would never have just gone and left town on some spontaneous trip without her luggage and possessions. For weeks after she disappeared, Elaine and her other children, Annette's siblings, tirelessly walked the roads of Breckenridge and the surrounding areas, trying to find any sign of Annette or what had happened to her, but they never found anything, and neither did the investigators. Despite the numerous tips coming in, all of the leads they got just led to dead ends. They looked into Annette's ex-boyfriends, one of which had a history of domestic violence. They looked into local sex offenders in the area and ruled all of them out. They looked into a couple of serial killers in the surrounding states. They hypnotized a witness that came forward and said that they had seen a car they thought might have been involved in the case. And when under hypnosis, this witness remembered a partial license plate number. So investigators looked into every single license plate that potentially matched that partial in the state. But these efforts got them no closer to finding Annette or solving the case. Oh, it's literally break time. That's the mic. Hello. Poor good girl. And then on the 3rd of July, 1982, 6 months after Annette had gone missing, a father and his young son went fishing at Sacramento Creek, which is a very remote area about half an hour drive from Hoosier Pass, where Bobbie Jo's body had been found. And it was in this creek that the young boy found Annette's body, which, despite having been there for 6 months, was pretty well preserved thanks to the cold weather and the water. Annette was laying face down in the creek, fully clothed, but with her clothes in a state of disarray, as if they had been put on in a desperate rush. For instance, she had both her shoes on and her jacket, but while on one foot she had a long striped sock, the other striped sock was found in her sweater pocket. Annette had been shot once in the back, and this was a through and through wound, meaning that the bullet had exited out of her chest, and investigators were never able to find this bullet or any others that might have been fired at Annette and missed. During her autopsy, though, it was determined that the bullet definitely could have come from the same gun that killed Bobbie Jo, a medium caliber handgun that had not been recovered at either of the crime scenes. As I said before, investigators already suspected that Bobbie Jo and Annette's cases were related, and this suspicion was confirmed when they examined Annette's clothing, because while on one foot she had that long striped sock, on the other foot she had a short orange sock that matched the one that had been found near Bobbie Jo's body. When Annette's mother, Elaine, was shown the orange socks, she confirmed that yes, they were Annette's. She had sent them to her in a Christmas package less than a month before the murders, because the orange color of the socks matched Annette's high school's colors back home in Iowa. So thanks to these orange socks, police could now be certain that Bobbie Jo and Annette were killed by the same man, and they worked out a timeline for the murders as well. The killer had picked up Annette first at about 5 p.m. in Breckenridge and then driven her well past her home and down a dead-end road in the remote area where her body was found. He had then sexually assaulted her in the car, and in her desperate rush to get her clothes back on afterwards, Annette had forgotten one of her orange socks and it had been left in the car. Annette then tried to escape, and while she was running away, the killer shot her in the back and left her to die. So Annette's final moments were really similar to Bobbie Jo's: alone, terrified in the freezing cold, slowly freezing and bleeding to death. Just a really callous, cruel end. After killing Annette, this man then returned to Breckenridge, where he picked up Bobbie Jo at about 8 p.m. and drove her to Hoosier Pass, where he attempted to sexually assault her in the parking lot, but Bobbie Jo fought back. She managed to escape the car, and it was probably during this struggle that Annette's orange sock fell out of the car. The killer then chased after Bobbie Jo, caught up with her, and shot her twice in the chest, and just like he had with Annette, he left her for dead. Now, while Hoosier Pass, where Bobbie Jo's body was found, was a fairly popular area among skiers, Sacramento Creek, where Annette's body was found, as I've mentioned, was very remote, somewhere not a lot of people knew about, and somewhere you really had to know was there to find it. So investigators were able to lean more into the idea that the killer was a local, not just some tourist on winter break. And a couple of months later in September, when they discovered Annette's backpack, not far from where Bobbie Jo's body had been left, they started looking pretty damn hard into one particular local, Jeff Oberholtzer, Bobbie Jo's husband. Jeff had already been questioned, of course, being the husband of one of the victims, and he had been very cooperative and very helpful during the investigation in any way that he could, almost to the point where he was in the way. But he had allowed his house to be searched for evidence, and he had agreed to a polygraph test 2 months after the murders, which he passed. But despite Jeff originally claiming to not recognize Annette at all when police showed him her picture, he later backtracked and said that he did recognize Annette, that he had actually met her one time when she had hitched a ride from him to Frisco. Jeff further went on to specify that he had given Annette a business card for his appliance repair business. And sure enough, in Annette's backpack, amongst the loose change and chapsticks and house keys, investigators found Jeff's business card. This meant that the husband of Bobbie Jo had a connection with Annette, which was extremely suspicious. Jeff knew both of the victims. There was even a rumor floating around town that Jeff had been having an affair with Annette and that things had gone sour and or Bobbie Jo had found out, and rather than dealing with the fallout, Jeff had just killed them both. And Jeff didn't have an amazing alibi for the 6th of January either. He said he had been at home all of that night in Alma, but the only person that could have corroborated this was an acquaintance of Jeff's that he said had stopped by that evening, an acquaintance that he had no contact information for or address because the man, due to money problems, was kind of a drifter living a transient lifestyle with no set address. Jeff was also the one that had found Bobbie's backpack and driver's license. And like we said, potentially he was in the group that discovered Bobbie Jo's body. So things were really not looking good for Jeff. But also in Annette's bag, investigators found this photo of a man that wasn't Jeff. And when they showed this photo to Annette's family and friends, no one seemed to be able to recognize him or identify him. This man had a crew cut, which led investigators to believe he was in the military, but the photo itself looked like it almost could have been a mugshot taken in prison. And the man had some sort of weird injury going on with his eye that made it look like he had been in a punch-up. So who was this man, and why did Annette have this strange photo of him? Did he give it to her? Had she taken it of him? No one knew. So police were looking for him, and they were also, of course, looking for the dark-haired woman that Annette had last been seen talking to outside the pharmacy. Unfortunately, they were unsuccessful on both counts. Now, sadly, this case went cold after about 18 months. Jeff Oberholzer remained the prime suspect and was watched really closely by investigators for years. Even when 9 years after the murders, police actually found the man that he said had been visiting him that night. Because while this man confirmed that yes, he had been at Jeff's house that night, the time that he gave for the visit didn't match up with the time that Jeff had given for the visit. And also Jeff's own brother, James Oberholzer, and his wife, Cindy. Anyway, they were very vocal in their opinion that Jeff was the one that had murdered Bobbie Jo. But Jeff said that this was because James, his brother, had always had a little bit of a thing for Bobbie Jo, and he was making these claims out of jealousy and spite. Regardless, unable to pin the murders on Jeff, but really suspicious that he was involved, authorities kept tabs on him for years, hoping that one day he'd slip up and make a mistake and incriminate himself. But as well as Jeff, there were a few other possible suspects that were looked into really intensely as well. One of these men was Thomas Edward Luther. In February 1982, the month following Bobbie Jo and Annette's murders, Luther had picked up a young woman who was hitchhiking in Breckenridge, claiming he was a cab driver, and he had then brutally sexually assaulted her and very severely beaten her, quite nearly to death, with a claw hammer. Weeks later, after he was arrested and was in jail awaiting trial, Luther had bragged to some of his cellmates that not only had he brutally attacked this poor woman, but that he was the one that had murdered Bobbie Jo and Annette. Allegedly, what he specifically said was that he had murdered 2 young women in Breckenridge and that authorities were never going to find the body of the second woman. And of course, this was months before Annette's body was found. After Luther had served his sentence for the sexual assault and claw hammer attack, he was then released from prison in the early 1990s. And he went on just months later to murder a 20-year-old woman who he had met while he was in prison and had fallen deeply in love with him. Like, I could do a separate video on Thomas Luther and what a monster he was, but let's just focus on one case at a time. Anyway, it was the investigators into that murder that gave the investigators into Bobbie Jo's and Annette's murders a heads up about what Luther had said to his cellmates and let them know that Luther had failed 2 polygraph tests when asked about Bobbie Jo and Annette's murders. So detectives immediately went and tracked down these cellmates and they confirmed their story about what Luther had told them. But when they then went to West Virginia to speak to Luther, who was back in prison and is still in prison to this day, serving a life sentence, thank God, Luther just flew into this rage, saying no, he hadn't been the one that had killed Bobbie Jo and Annette, pointing out that he preferred to use a hammer, not a gun. Another possible suspect was Tracy Petrochelli, who had shot to death his 18-year-old fiancée Melanie Barker in October 1981 before fleeing the state and going on a murderous cross-country rampage that lasted 6 months and claimed the lives of at least 3 others. The reason Petrochelli was looked into closely was on the night that Bobbie Jo and Annette were murdered, he just happened to be staying in the Holiday Inn in Frisco, where Annette had worked cleaning rooms. Now, a huge turning point in this case was in 1998 when finally the blood that had been on Bobbie Jo's glove and on the tissue found near her bag was tested for DNA. It had been assumed all this time that the blood on the glove had been Bobbie Jo's, but when the results came back in, investigators were surprised to find that the blood had actually come from an unknown male donor. No matches were found on their criminal database when they ran the DNA, but they were able to determine that the blood did not belong to Jeff Oberholzer. So finally, after 16 years, Jeff was officially cleared as a suspect. But he still suffered that stigma of having been suspected of killing Bobbie Jo and Annette all these years. His business went under. I'm pretty sure he had to move towns and change professions. It was just awful. The blood was also tested against the DNA of about a dozen other people, including, of course, Thomas Luther, and it wasn't a match. So police were officially able to rule him out as a suspect as well. While the DNA also wasn't a match for Tracy Petrochelli, Petrochelli had this fun kink where he would pick up male hitchhikers and convince them to do his killing for him and then kill them. So the DNA evidence didn't rule him out or rule out the chance that he was still involved. Unfortunately, there weren't any matches found for the DNA. So while police were able to rule some suspects out, they didn't get any closer to discovering who actually had killed Bobbie Jo and Annette. So the case went cold again, even though there was still work being done, like really good work being done by different departments and different counties, all working to solve the case. Seriously, the investigative work in this case really stands out because it's like, wow, these guys did their very best and never gave up, ever. It's like almost what we should expect from the police by default. Crazy. Although there were a lot of different people involved in the investigation, it seems like the two main driving forces were Charlie McCormick, who was a retired detective at the time of the murders, but worked on the case as a private investigator for Annette's family for years, charging them an annual fee of exactly $1, and Richard Eaton, who was a detective with the Summit County's Sheriff's Office and was assigned to the case in 1989. These guys worked together and chased up every lead that came their way. Like, they traveled across the country as far as Vermont based on a tip from a psychic. And the case file, which had consisted of just 2 measly binders when Eaton had been assigned to the case in 1989, grew to 39 binders. And they were also running the DNA through CODIS against the millions of convicted felons in the system every single week. And their tireless efforts finally paid off this year, 39 years after the murder, when a man was arrested at a routine traffic stop on the 24th of February 2021. This man's name was Alan Lee Phillips, and he was a 70-year-old father of 3, semi-retired mechanic living in Clear Creek County. Police records show that Phillips had been arrested on assault and burglary charges back in 1973, and these charges had been purged in 2002, but he was now being charged with 2 counts of kidnapping, 2 counts of first-degree assault, and 2 counts of first-degree murder. And I know you're sitting there like, who the heck is this Alan Lee Phillips guy, and how did police work out it was him after all these years? And this, best friends, is where this case goes totally crazy. On the night of Wednesday, the 6th of January, 1982, the night that Bobbie Jo and Annette had been murdered, Alan Lee Phillips, who was 30 years old at the time, also made national headlines because that night, just before midnight, he was rescued from the top of Guanella Pass, which is about an hour's drive from where Bobbie Jo and Annette's bodies were found. Now, the reason his rescue made national news is because the story was just crazy. I mean, I'm sorry, I feel like I've said crazy a lot, but I don't know how else to describe it. Basically, right, a United Airlines flight just happened to be flying over Guanella Pass, and a Jefferson County sheriff just happened to be on that flight, and he just happened to look out of his window and see some flashing lights. As the sheriff watched, he realized that the lights were blinking the Morse code for SOS. So he notified the airplane staff and they radioed down for help, and 15 minutes after the phone call came in, an emergency responder made his way to the top of the pass, and sure enough, there was Phillips, shivering away in his pickup truck, stuck in a snowdrift. It was well known that Guanella Pass was not even remotely passable this time of year, but Phillips had been driving without tire chains in the heavy snow and sub-zero temperatures. So, of course, the emergency responder, probably a little bit pissed off, asked him, "What the hell were you thinking?" And Phillips' response was that it seemed like a good idea at the time. He said he had gotten drunk at a bar and then made the brilliant decision to drive home and then just gotten stuck. We now know that this was a bold-faced lie. He was just trying to hightail it out of the area and away from the 2 murders he had just committed. When the responder asked about a sizable bruise on the side of Phillips' face, he said that at some point he had gotten out of the truck to relieve himself, and on his way back he had been so blinded by the snow that he just ran face first into the corner of the truck. But it's of course much more likely that Bobbie Jo had given him this bruise while she had struggled with him, and that's why his blood had been found on her glove. But yeah, Phillips' rescue made headlines, and he even gave a little interview to a newspaper saying, and I quote, "You find out how lonely it is real quick. I thought about walking to a ski area nearby and went about 200 yards and thought, no way. It was too cold." Weird how he didn't think it was too lonely or too cold when he murdered Bobbie Jo and Annette and then left them there to die. Just saying. And that was the last we heard of Phillips all these years. While the investigations were going into Bobbie Jo and Annette's murders, he lived in Colorado all that time. Like I said, he had 3 kids. He was a mechanic. He was just living a normal, happy life. So how did they catch him? Well, after having no luck running the DNA from Bobbie Jo's glove through CODIS countless times all of those years, along came a company called United Data Connect, which was founded by Mitch Morrissey, a veteran prosecutor who also served as the District Attorney of Denver for 3 terms. United Data Connect specializes in a few different things, but the thing relevant to this case is forensic genetic genealogy analysis. Sounds very fancy, I know, but they essentially take DNA, a lot of it from crime scenes, and search it against a public database of over 1 million people to find matches. And when the company searched for a match to the DNA on Bobbie Jo's glove, they combed through a family tree of approximately 12,000 odd people, some of whom were actually approached by investigators to voluntarily give a DNA sample, all of whom said yes. And apparently it was a sample from Philip's 3rd cousin that led investigators directly to him. Crazy. So Phillips was surveilled for about 6 weeks leading up to the arrest. Police were tailing him everywhere, trying to get a sample of his DNA. And they seized the opportunity when on the 20th of February 2021, he went through a Sonic drive-thru and then onto the post office where he threw out the paper bag that his food had been in. As soon as he left the building, police swooped in, grabbed the bag out of the trash, managed to get DNA from it, tested it against the DNA on Bobbie Jo's glove, got a match, and that was it. 4 days later, they arrested him without incident at the traffic stop. Phillips was immediately whisked away to the Park County Jail, and that's where he has remained ever since. His preliminary. Why is preliminary so hard to say? His preliminary hearing is scheduled for this year on the 13th of September, and I believe that this is the 6th cold case that United Data Connect has managed to assist with solving, but none of these cases have actually gone to trial because all of the perpetrators are either long dead or have just straight up pled guilty when faced with the DNA evidence. But there's every chance that while he has been arrested and while it is pretty damn clear that he is the one that murdered Bobbie Jo and Annette, Alan Lee Phillips might fight the charges and it might go to trial. So investigators are asking for anyone with information about Phillips to please call this number here. You can remain completely anonymous, don't worry, but in the instance that this does go to trial and you have information you think might help the case against Phillips, then please take a second and make the call. And now let's move on to final thoughts. So I hope I'm not the only one that was totally dumbstruck by this case. Like when I was researching, there were so many times where my jaw was literally on the floor. Like not literally, but you get the idea. It's crazy. How bizarre is it that Phillips was rescued from a snowstorm on the same night that he committed 2 murders? And then he got away with it for 40 years. Like I did have times where I was like, how did no one make the connection? But it's also such a crazy story that I totally get why no one connected those dots. As for Jeff being the prime suspect for so many years, like it's terrible enough that these 2 women were robbed of their lives so brutally. Like that in a nutshell is terrible and tragic enough. But then it's so tragic as well for Jeff that after losing his wife, he went through so much more as well. I mean, I get it. It did not look good for him. Investigators were just doing their job, but it's just so sad that those years were robbed from him by Phillips, who, like we've discussed, was just out there, a free man living his best life. I know Jeff has managed to move on. He's remarried and I think he's had more children, but just being under suspicion all those years and not knowing who had really killed Bobbie Jo, I can only imagine the toll that took. Thankfully, Annette's mother, Elaine Franklin, who is well into her 80s now, survived to see this case solved. But sadly, Bobbie Jo's brother and father have passed away and they died not knowing who had killed killed her. And that brings something else to light with these cold cases that are solved with DNA decades and decades later that we're seeing more and more of. It's amazing that these families get closure and hopefully justice after all this time. But also, Alan Lee Phillips killed these two women, and potentially more, because as it's been pointed out, it would be extremely unusual for a man to brazenly go and kill two women in a singular night and not have committed other similar crimes. So law enforcement are already looking into whether he has connection with any other unsolved crimes. But anyway, he killed Bobbie Jo and Annette, but he wasn't caught. So he got to go on and live a happy, normal life for nearly 4 decades. He had a family, he had kids and got to see them grow up. He lived life as a free man throughout his 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, all of the years that he savagely snatched away from Bobbie Jo and Annette. Like, I feel he definitely will be convicted, but he's 70 years old. He's probably not going to live long enough to serve his sentence. So it feels bittersweet. Like, justice is finally being served, but only in like a little baby-sized portion kind of way. Is that just me? I would love, as usual, to hear your guys' thoughts on this case. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, remember to let me know by giving it a thumbs up so that I can be like, KK, cool. I know what you guys want more of. I also just want to say sorry again for my absence. I promise I will be back very, very soon, most likely with part 1 of the multi-parter deep dive that I mentioned at the start of the video. That again is on a case suggested by one of you guys. And if you have a case that you would like to see me cover, then definitely let me know in the comments down below, or find me on Instagram, or you can find my email address on my channel page. Just find me and tell me about the case, because to be honest, you guys are killing it with the suggestions. Lily, come say bye. You gonna come say bye? Look, no, just there. They're just there. Look, they're there. Have you guys? Oh, you want to sing? Can you sing? Thank you so much for hanging out with me and Lily today. We really appreciate it as usual. I hope you have a wonderful week. I mentioned you. Me and Lily hope you have a great week, and we will be counting down the hours until we see you in the next one. Bye.
But I have to stay afloat. It's noisy. Be a person.